everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is January 2nd, 2024. Happy New Year. We are joined today by Scott Ritter and his friend Alexander Zirianov. You all know Scott. Mr. Zirianov is a financial planner and developer and eyes and ears of a lot of people, including mine, in Moscow. Scott and Alexander join us tonight from Moscow, Russia. Scott, Alexander, it's a pleasure, gentlemen. Welcome to the show, and thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, Scott, I want to ask you and Alexander, what is the mood of the Russian people in Moscow at the dawn of 2024?
Скотт, хочу спросить вас и Александра, как вообще настроение у россиян в начале 2024 года?
I'll say very shortly, optimism. The Russian people are very optimistic. They have a very positive future ahead of them. It's a very difficult road that they're on, but they're very optimistic that they will get to the end of the road and that things will be better. But it's probably better if Alexander answers that from the Russian perspective.
So, Alexander, what is the mood of the Russian people in Moscow in January 2024, as we speak?
Александр, каково настроение россиян в Москве в январе 2024 года, на сегодняшний день?
Да, добрый день, господин Наполитано. Настроение у всех оптимистическое, очень все хорошо. Мы знаем, что этот год будет замечательным для нашей страны.
Good afternoon, Mr. Napolitano. Well, the people are optimistic. We know that it's going to be a good year for us.
What is the feeling, Scott, about the duration of the special military operation in Ukraine? Are people impatient for a victory? Are they understanding of the military strategy of President Putin? Do they respect the sort of slow, methodical, careful, surgical way in which the war has been fought?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to understand that even at this stage in the war, President Putin's approval rating is above 70%. Some say 76%. But that means that there's 24% that don't support. So, you know, you're going to get a range of opinions depending on who you talk to. But I think the majority of the Russian people understand that this is a lengthy process, that it has to be seen through properly, and that they will not be held prisoner by a calendar, that this is an objective-based conflict, and that President Putin and his leadership, his military leadership, have a plan that is succeeding. And so they are supportive of the president's plans and the military's actions at this point.
I'm going to ask you another question, Scott, but before I do, some of the commenters are saying they're having difficulty hearing the translator. So could you have your technical person raise the volume on the microphone of the translator?
I think if he just comes closer to the microphone, he'll be able to hear it.
Okay, yeah. I'll leave that up to the two of you. But back to what you just said. Is there an opposition to the war, or is there a recognition, a universal recognition, that it's nearly over, that the threat from NATO was real, and President Putin's leadership was prudent?
I think that the majority of the opposition, people who were opposed to the war, fled the country early on in the war, and that today there are people that are resigned to the fact that this is a war that it exists, and that it has to be finished. Most people support the president. A lot of people have questions still, but I don't think that anybody who's hoping that there will be a division within the Russian people, I think they're hoping in vain. But again, maybe Alexander is the best person to answer this question.
Alexander, what is the consensus of the Russian people of President Putin's leadership in economic matters and in military matters?
Александр, как воспринимают россияне руководство президента Путина в экономическом и военном смысле?
Да, вы знаете, Владимир Путин уже много лет руководит нашей страной, и мы помним 90-е годы, помним, когда Россия была в очень тяжелой ситуации, поэтому видим, как много у нас меняется к лучшему.
President Putin has been at the helm for many years, and we remember the 1990s when life was very challenging. We can see a lot of change for the better.
Во время специальной военной операции его поддержка только возросла со стороны людей, потому что мы понимаем, за что мы боремся и за что мы сражаемся.
And during the special military operation, his support has grown because we understand what we are fighting for.
По своей работе я отвечаю за экономику в Новосибирской области, за привлечение и строительство новых заводов и предприятий.
In my job, I'm responsible for the economy of the Novosibirsk region, for building new plants and facilities.
И в этом году у нас самый большой приток инвестиций и строительства новых предприятий за все время моей работы в этом направлении.
And this year we have seen the biggest volume of investment for the whole period that I have been in the office.
Мы перевыполнили план в 4 раза. Если план у нас был привлечь 4 миллиарда, то мы привлекли почти 20.
We have outperformed on our plan almost fourfold. Our initial plan was to raise 4 billion rubles. We have raised almost 20.
Поэтому поддержка у нас президента, она безоговорочная, это однозначно, это не какой-то пропагандистский штамп, это то, с чем я сталкиваюсь среди своих друзей, знакомых. И как мы шутим в России, спасибо Джо Байдену за санкции.
So the support of President Putin is unquestionable, and this is not propaganda. This is something that I come across on a daily basis. And we have a joke that we thank President Biden for the sanctions.
So Alexander
без санкций и без санкций, которые ввел Джо Байден, наша экономика бы не росла такими быстрыми темпами.
Had it not been for the sanctions that Joe Biden implemented, our economy wouldn't have been growing at such a pace.
But now, Scott, this is really remarkable, and it is consistent with what you predicted when you were back here in the United States and when the sanctions were first imposed, and it is consistent with your observations of the Russian economy after the sanctions were imposed. Big deal. McDonald's is gone, but whatever replaced it has produced a higher level of commerce than beforehand. Do you sense this in your moving around the city, Scott?
When I was here last May, Alexander took me to 12 cities throughout Russia. And in every city that I visited, I saw the kind of growth that Alexander is speaking of. What was happening in Novosibirsk was mind-blowing. But it was matched in Ekaterinburg and Irkutsk and Izhevsk and Kazan. It's not just St. Petersburg and Moscow that are growing. It's all of Russia that is growing. And it's growing at a pace that would make any American developer jealous by comparison, envious. So, it's amazing what Russia has been able to do. And the sad thing is that we don't understand it because we don't take the time to learn about Russia, to meet people. That's one of the most important things about what's happening between me and Alexander. We're talking. Imagine that, Russians talking to Americans about these issues. We're having a conversation, a dialogue, and we need this kind of conversation in place. America needs people like Alexander Zhiryanov to speak with them, to educate them, to help them understand Russia, because what's happening in Russia today should not be viewed as a threat. It doesn't threaten America at all. It's good for Russia, and it's good for America, because a healthy Russia is good for America. The last thing we want to do is have an unhealthy Russia. So what I'm seeing right now is a Russia that is very much alive. If you think sanctions have hurt Russia, come to Moscow, and you'll see something totally different.
So, Alexander, I know you said this is a joke. The Russian people thank Joe Biden for the sanctions. But how have the sanctions helped the Russian economy?
Александр, вы сказали, что есть такая шутка, что россияне благодарят Джо Байдену за санкции. А как санкции помогли российской экономике?
Раньше очень много товаров мы перестали производить, потому что их привозили из Америки, из Европы, и мы забыли, как это делать все сами. А сейчас, когда ввели санкции, у нас нехватка этих товаров, мы начинаем их сами производить. И в итоге мы становимся более суверенной, независимой страной, потому что меньше зависим от поставок из-за рубежа. Мы стали многое делать внутри страны, то, что раньше покупали у Америки, у Европы.
Well, we unlearned how to produce a lot of goods because we imported them from the US or Europe. And with sanctions, they are no longer available, so we have to relearn how to produce them. And it improves our sovereignty. It makes us more self-sustained.
Scott, what is the status of conscription in Russia, and what is the status of the Russian army? From my perspective here, being educated by you, Colonel McGregor, Larry Johnson, Ray McGovern, and the others, it appears that the war is nearly over. Ukraine is on its last leg, but it also appears that Russian mothers and sisters and daughters and girlfriends want their sons and fathers and boyfriends and uncles to come home from the war.
Well, everybody wants their loved ones to come home from the war, but if you walk around Moscow, you walk around any city in Russia, you'll see posters for recruiting. 1,500 Russian men are volunteering every day to go to this war. The war may appear to be almost over, but there's a lot of fighting left. The Russians know this. They know that there's a lot that's left to be done to finish the job, and they know they have to finish the job. So while people may want their loved ones to come home, I think there's a widespread understanding that they won't come home, nor should they come home until the job is done. It's sort of what happened in the United States, where we sent off 12 million American soldiers to fight against the Japanese and against the Germans. And certainly everybody wanted them all to come home, but not until the job was done. And the job had to be done right. And that's the sentiment that I feel exists in Russia. There's no anti-war movement. I'm not going to say that there's a strong pro-war movement because the Russians are too mature for that. But there is a desire that Russia must defeat this enemy, this Ukrainian government that's embraced the ideology of Stepan Bandera, that carries out atrocities like the attack on Belgorod the other day, that this government must be destroyed, and that's the job of the Russian military, and the Russian people are behind them.
Alexander, are the Russian people fearful of an expansion of the war? As you know, President Biden has threatened, I don't think he's serious, but he has threatened the use of American ground troops. Are the Russian people concerned about this?
Скажите, Александр, а боятся ли в России расширения военных действий? Президент Байден упоминал, не знаю, насколько он серьезен был в этом утверждении, что рассматривает возможность отправки американских войск. Вот насколько боятся в России расширения военных действий?
Очень хороший вопрос, спасибо. Мы не хотим этого, но мы не боимся.
That's a very good question, thank you. We don't want that, but we're not afraid of that.
Мы понимаем, за что мы сражаемся, и я хотел бы обратиться и к американцам, что не надо видеть нас врагов.
We know what we're fighting for, and I want to address the US people now. Please don't view us as enemies.
Чтобы американским людям проще было нас понять, представьте, что вокруг Америки, в Мексике, в Канаде стояли бы наши военные базы и ракеты. Наверное, американцам бы это не понравилось.
To understand us, please imagine the world when there would be military bases and missiles in countries neighboring the US, such as Mexico or Canada. How would you feel? I don't think you would like it.
Мы, как никто, не хотим воевать, потому что, вы знаете, во время Великой Отечественной Второй мировой войны у нас погибло 27 миллионов человек.
We don't want to fight. We want to fight the least because during the World War II, during the Great Patriotic War, 27 million people died.
И для нас сейчас наша военная операция – это в том числе и память о наших дедах, которые погибли.
So for us, this special military operation is in part in memory of our grandfathers who died back then.
Поэтому мы никогда не проиграем эту войну.
That is why we're never going to lose that war.
Мы не хотим воевать, я еще раз повторюсь, но если до этого дойдет дело, то воевать мы умеем лучше всех.
We don't want to fight, I want to repeat that, but if it comes to fighting, we know we can fight better than everyone else.
What do the Russian people think of the West, of Western society, of the US, of the UK, and of Western Europe?
Александр, а что думают россияне о Западе, о западном обществе, о США, о Великобритании, о Западной Европе?
Мы четко отделяем народы этих стран от руководства этих стран.
We see a clear distinction between the peoples of those nations and their political leadership.
И Скотт свидетель, очень хорошее отношение к американцам. У нас нет никакого негатива к американцам. Я понимаю, что это может быть с учетом той пропаганды, которая в США звучит удивительно, но я надеюсь, господин Наполитано, что вы лично приедете, я вас приглашаю. Жаль, что в этот раз не получилось, вы сможете сами в этом убедиться.
And Scott was able to witness that. There are no negative feelings to the US people. Scott could experience that. And Mr. Napolitano, I would invite you to come over and experience it yourselves.
Ваша программа очень популярна в России. Я специально сегодня посмотрел, все ваши ролики смотрят на YouTube 250-300 тысяч русских.
Your show is very popular in Russia. I checked today, and on YouTube, the episodes of your show have 250 to 300,000 views.
И я, пользуясь случаем, если можно, хотел бы поздравить американский народ, представляя русский народ, поздравить с Новым годом.
And I would like to use this opportunity to congratulate the people of the United States from the people of Russia with the holiday season, with the New Year.
Мы не враги, мы такие же люди, как и американцы. Мы так же, как и вы, хотим жить, работать, жениться, рожать детей, путешествовать, приезжать к вам в гости, чтобы вы приезжали к нам в гости.
We are people just like you. We are not your enemies. We want to live like you. We want to work like you. We want to get married like you. We want to travel and travel to visit each other.
Поэтому я хотел бы пожелать американцам здоровья, счастья.
So I would like to wish US people good health and happiness.
Благополучия и больше хороших новостей и позитивных событий.
Well-being, more positive news and more positive events. Thank you.
Thank you for your kind comments about the show, Alexander, and thank you for being a part of it today. And yes, I would love to visit Russia as long as that youngster sitting next to you, I'm referring to Ritter, can be with us when I come. Scott, is the war in Gaza reflected in any way in public opinion in Moscow?
Look, the Russians are some of the most well-informed people about international events. They have their finger on the pulse, but I'm going to be honest, the most important thing for the Russians right now is the conflict in Ukraine. This is what strikes home. The attack on Belgorod tore at the heart of every Russian to see children killed, to see innocent civilians killed, an attack on civilian infrastructure. And keep in mind that this isn't a unique event. It's been happening nonstop over the course of the special military operation and for 8 years prior with the Ukrainians attacking the civilian population of the Donbass. So for the Russians, this is the thing that they are most concerned about is the conflict in Ukraine. They are aware of what's going on around the world. They, of course, are following the events, but it's what's happening in Ukraine that bears on them first and foremost.
So the Ukrainians have attacked the Russians in the Donbass, and they've attacked Russians in Russia. What does this tell you? Is this attack in Russia just the last gasp of a dying administration, knowing that it's about to be defeated in war?
That seems to be the opinion of Russian political commentators and political officials across the board, that the Ukrainians are desperate to create a provocation that would get Russia to act in a way that could trigger a NATO intervention. I think what we saw today is that Russia did respond to what happened in Belgorod, but it was a response that was limited to strategic and military targets. There was no revenge strike against Ukrainian civilians, nor will there be, because that's not how Russia operates. So I think the Russian government has this situation under control, but I can tell you it's very, very difficult because, as you know, Russian President Vladimir Putin said the other day that what happened in Belgorod made his blood boil. It made everybody's blood in Russia boil. They are so angry about what happened, but this anger is not translating into revenge. What it's doing is doubling down on their absolute commitment to see this war through.
So wear your hat as a military strategist and observer. What happened in Belgorod and why did it happen?
What happened in Belgorod is that the Ukrainians used their own domestic production of multiple launch rocket system and some Czechoslovakian provided systems that were equipped with cluster munitions. And they fired them into the center of the city where they knew that Russian civilians were gathering to celebrate the New Year, gathering in a market, gathering in a Christmas market. And it was done specifically to kill innocent civilians, to generate terror among the Russian population. That's what happened.
How far into Russia, so forgive my typical American ignorance of geography, how far into Russia from Ukraine is Belgorod?
It's dozens of kilometers. It's not deep into Russia, but it's the first major city near the Ukrainian border, and it's been subjected to Ukrainian attacks now over the course of 2 years. But this attack was particularly vicious because it used cluster munitions specifically to kill civilians.
The last time we spoke about the special military operation, you were confident that it was effectively over, that Ukraine is really on its last leg. Do you have any reason to retreat from that position?
None whatsoever. The Russian military is firmly in control of the situation. But again, I just remind people that the bloodiest month of the war between the United States and Germany during World War II wasn't June of 1944 during D-Day or December of 1944 during the Battle of the Bulge. It was April 1945, the last month of the war, when the German army had been defeated, when everybody knew what the outcome it was. There was a lot of fighting left to be done. There's a lot of fighting left to be done between Russia and Ukraine. The war's over, Russia's won, but they have to finalize that victory.
When President Biden spoke to the press about 3 weeks ago, and you and I have viewed that clip many times, and he said, I'm going to paraphrase, after Putin takes Ukraine, or if Putin takes Ukraine, nothing will prevent him from attacking NATO countries in Eastern Europe, and that will produce something that none of us wants, Russian boys against American boys. I think the statement was absurd, but when he said that, how did that resonate with the Russian people and the Russian leadership?
Well, I think the answer that Alexander Zhuryanov gave about the fact that the Russians don't want to fight NATO, they're not looking for a fight to NATO, answers the question. The Russian government, believe it or not, is not a dictatorship. It is a government that is responsive to the will, to the needs of the Russian nation, of the Russian people. The Russian people aren't looking for a fight with the West. The Russian people want to live peacefully with the West. So when Russia defeats the Ukrainian government, and they will, defeats the Ukrainian military, they're not looking for a fight with Europe. They don't want that. They want peace. Alexander Zhuryanov presides over the third largest city, the economy of the third largest city in Russia. It's the most successful economy in Russia. A war with the West would destroy all that. That would undo everything he has worked so hard to accomplish, everything that all Russians have worked hard to accomplish. Russia's not looking for a war. Russia's looking for peace. I mean, Alexander probably can add to that, but I don't see a nation that's looking for a war with the West, and therefore I don't see a Russian government that's looking for a war with the West. This is fiction in the minds of Joe Biden.
Alexander, aside from the joke that Joe Biden has helped the Russian economy with the sanctions, what do the Russian people think of the American president?
Александр, кроме шутки о том, что Джо Байден помог России своими санкциями, что россияне думают об американском президенте?
Я скажу честно, прошу никого не обижаться.
I'll be honest with you, please don't get offended.
Но, если честно, большинство россиян недоумевает по поводу того, что Америка такая великая нация, и у нее такой невменяемый, непонятно вообще в себе человек или не в себе, или у него уже деменция. Поэтому мы очень удивлены, что американцы позволяют руководить собой такого человека.
Russians know that the US is a great nation, and we are very much surprised that such a great nation has the president that it has at the moment, who may be out of his mind, who might have dementia. And we are surprised why a nation as great as yours lets be ruled by such an individual.
It's interesting, Scott, that President Biden's well-known, well-observed mental deficiencies are apparent all over the world. I guess I shouldn't be surprised at that.
Well, again, I just want to remind your audience, Judge, that one of the problems that we face in the United States is Russophobia, and it's this irrational fear of Russia, and it comes from the ignorance of Russia. The Russian people are as smart as you can get, and they know the world, they understand the world, they know what's happening in the world. They're fully cognizant of everything that happens in the United States. They are more apprised of American politics than many Americans. So they know very well what's happening. They understand the consequences of having a leader like Joe Biden, the dangers that are there. But they also respect that America is a sovereign nation and that this is our problem to solve. They have to live with the consequences of it, but the responsibility of solving this problem is an American responsibility.
So, Alexander, I'm going to guess that somebody in the White House is watching this show. What would you like to say to them?
Александр, я предположу, что кто-то из Белого дома смотрит нашу передачу. Что бы вы хотели им сказать?
Я хотел бы им сказать, чтобы они больше думали о благополучии простого народа Америки, чем о своем собственном.
Well, I would encourage them to think more about the well-being of the people of the United States rather than of their own well-being.
Okay, Alexander, thank you very much. Pavel, thank you. Scott.
Слушай, Карпов, сделай вид, что я этого не слышал. Судьба тебя и так любит. Не слушай.
Их, в общем-то, всех и назвали русские, потому что это глагол. Русские — это какой, чей отвечает.
17 гривен килограмм оказалось. Ну и что из этого?
Ну как?
Килограмм. Это не очень дорого. 17 гривен килограмм — это не очень дорого. И вообще во всем мире яйца меряются в килограммах, а не в штуках.
Вы что, издеваетесь, что ли? У нас в килограммах измеряет. Вы что, издеваетесь?
Есть мелкое яйцо, есть крупное яйцо.
Ну, и все равно...
Разные. И цена разная.
Игорь Владимирович.
У мелкого яйца одна цена, у крупного яйца другая цена.
Правильно. Ну,
а если взять их в килограмме, если взять их за килограмм, это будет универсальная цена.
Ты черный жопа. Мне не нравится черный жопа. Ты черный.
Наверное, зря жалел Деникин хамов. Их надо было брозгать да плетьми. А вот теперь ни воинства, ни храмов. Демократия помойки диктует моду на мораль. Мне наплевать, а сердцу горько.
Еще раз зафиксировали, Петр, зафиксировали то, что я сказал. В Татарстане нету ни одной школы с татарским языком обучения. Это факт. Это факт. Великий чудак и поныне за правду воюет. Правда в речах его правды, налоговый грош.
Ніж передали. 1922 році. Воронежской области.
А в 22 году Львивская область где была?
В Австро-Венгрии.
Опаньки, так это не была еще?
Ну,
в соседней стране 70 миллионов. Они нас ненавидят за это, за то, что мы живем хорошо. Ненавидят. И будут ненавидеть всегда. Просто потому, что мы есть и живем хорошо.
Картошовский был. Мы сделали украинскому городу ничего. Италия, да. Украина, которая создана. Ну, экономическую